Caroline, hi. James Hammond. Just an update. James Brierley and his colleague Fiona Kilminster are looking to join, but they've informed me that they're not being allowed in. I don't know if it's a link that's been updated or.
No, I will resend them the link.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's 2 o'clock now, and it's time to open the hearing session for matter 6, which concerns the strategy for the Romney Marsh area. My name is Phil Milam, and my colleague is Kevin Ward, and we are the inspectors appointed by the Secretary of State under Section 20 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004 to carry out the independent examination of the Folkestone and Hythe District Core Strategy Review. Programme Officer for the examination is Caroline Williams, and she'll be present for all of the hearing sessions. Caroline, can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, everything's fine, thank you, Inspector.
Splendid, thank you. Now, as Caroline would have indicated to you when you joined, we would prefer it if you could keep your cameras switched on during the session so that we're all visible on the screen, but have your microphone switched to mute unless you're speaking. However, if for any reason you don't wish to keep your camera on all the time, don't feel compelled to do so. Please feel free to make your comments just orally if you so wish. So before we proceed with the opening announcements, I think it'd be useful for the council's representatives and then the other participants to introduce themselves, and this will help to confirm that everyone can be seen and heard okay. So if I can start by asking the council's representatives to introduce yourselves one by one, please.
Sir, good afternoon. My name is Paul Shadarevian, QC, and I represent the council.
Good afternoon.
Hello, my name is Adrian Tofts, and I'm lead specialist in strategy for Folkestone and Hythe District Council.
Good afternoon, I'm Tim Bailey, and I'm a planning policy specialist for Folkestone and Hythe District Council.
Thank you. I was going to move down my list, and I have got Mr. Hainsworth.
Good afternoon, everyone. David Hainsworth, General Manager at Lydd Airport.
Thank you. And I've got next on my list is I have a Fiona Kilminster from Gerald Eve. Fiona on. No, I've got a.
I'm afraid we've had a little trouble getting into this afternoon session, but I'm in, and hopefully the link she's been sent will get her in. I'm James Brierley from Gerald Eve also.
Thank you.
I'm in now. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. And Ms. Barton.
My name's Louise Martin. I'm a local Marsh resident and represent Lydd Airport Action Group.
And down my list I've got Mr. McGrath.
Hi, sir. Sean McGrath from WSP. We're planning advisors for the airport.
Thank you very much. And as per usual, there's some other members of the council's team who are just sitting in the background and observing proceedings, and they may chip in, I guess, if the need arises. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir. Yes.
Okay, and if when those people do come in, if they can introduce themselves at that point, that will be fine. Thank you.
Of course, yeah.
So just to remind everyone that the guidance notes that we issued back in May set out the background to the examination and the hearings, and all the documents relevant to the examination are available on the council's websites. Guidance notes for the virtual hearings were issued recently, so please bear these in mind, along with the relevant privacy notice. An agenda has been produced for the hearing sessions, and hopefully you've all got a copy of that. And we will work through the agenda in order, so please wait until the appropriate agenda item to make any points. And once we've dealt with a particular issue, we will move on and won't be returning to it. So please make sure you cover all the points you wish to make at the appropriate time. Can you also be as focused as you can while speaking and avoid simply agreeing with other speakers or repeating any points you've already made? And we've got quite a bit to get through this afternoon, and we want to make sure that we make the best use of time. We will often be directing questions to the council, but we'll give others the full opportunity to speak in relation to the representations they've made on the core strategy review. and we'll typically ask the council to respond to any points before moving on to the next point. Please only speak when asked to do so. Obviously, unmute your microphone when speaking, and otherwise have it muted during the session. And we'll only have one participant speaking at a time. If you do wish to speak on a particular item, please use the raise hand facility. Mr. McGrath, I can see you've got one. If I just get through my opening, and then I'll come to that if it's okay. And please do not attempt to introduce or share documents, and do not use the chat function. If we require any additional documents, we'll ask for them, and they will need to be provided to Caroline, the Programme Officer, separately. If you have any technical difficulties or lose connection and we can't resolve the issues, please obviously contact Caroline, and we'll do our best to ensure that we assist you as best as possible. And please can you make sure that phones or other devices are either off or on silent. And it may be helpful to you to limit the number of devices you've got on your Wi-Fi, as these sessions can take up a fair bit of bandwidth. We will take a break at an appropriate point during the session, and at that point, what I'd like people to do is to turn their cameras off and to mute their microphones, but not to log out of the Zoom meeting, and just to stay logged in. And then please make sure you're also ready to resume when we come back from any breaks. As you'll be aware, all of the sessions are being streamed live on the Council's YouTube channel, and that link can be accessed by the Council's website. So before we get going, are there any queries in relation to the format and procedures for the hearing, or anything on Zoom? And if not, Mr. McGrath, you had a hand raised.
Yes, sorry, sir. It's just very Victoria Chase from WSP is with David Hainsworth, so I thought I'd better introduce her in case she does speak. She's sitting with David down at the airport.
Yes, I can see you both. You've obviously just got the one name on my list, but
sorry.
Whoever needs to be taking charge of the hand raise function, then that's up to yourselves. Thank you for that. That's helpful. Okay, so without further ado, we'll crack on with the agenda, and I thank the Council for producing a very fulsome response to our matters, issues and questions on all the matters, but also including the strategy for the Romney Marsh area. Now, I mean, it appears that sort of the Romney Marsh area, we sort of had a high level discussion about the overall district-wide spatial strategy. And my sort of initial sort of matter question was asked was, what's the basis for the strategy? And essentially sort of what's been said, I think to summarise over the last couple of days, is that the approach has been derived from the high level options report back in 2016, and that's looked at the Romney Marsh character area. And from that assessment looked at a number of different themes in terms of environment, landscape, other constraints and opportunities. And from that assessment effectively came to the view that the Romney Marsh area overall wasn't suitable for strategic scale development, but may have been suitable for some much smaller scale development having regard to those constraints. So really, so my first question to the Council is it sort of true to say that those are essentially the key factors that have led you to where you are in terms of the approach for the Romney Marsh area overall?
Yes, sir, that would be true to say. I would also point you to the high level landscape appraisal, where particularly a note is kind of recognised about the landscape qualities of the marsh and the sort of wide skies and the rural nature of the landscape there. And as we've discussed in sessions this morning, there is the existing broad location there, which has been carried over from the 2013 course strategy.
Yes, I mean, we'll sort of come on to this sort of new Romney in a little bit more detail, but in terms of the Romney Marsh area overall and the villages included within that character area, I mean, that approach is essentially as taken forward. And I suppose in your view, you've effectively told us you're rolling forward the approach from the previous core strategy, and that remains justified. But do those circumstances still hold today as they did at the point in which the previous 2013 strategy was developed?
I think the circumstances still hold true and have been rolled forward. So the policy talks about the historic character of the area and economic role and retail functions, etc. And yeah, we believe that still remains relevant to policies for the Romney Marsh.
Yes, because I mean, I sort of noted that. I mean, we talked a fair bit about sort of the landscape issues, as you say, and you mentioned the high-level landscape appraisal. We've obviously talked a bit about sort of other national and international designated sites, flood risk concerns. But the high-level options report did talk about the need for sort of local regeneration in the Romney Marsh area, and I suppose sort of we had a good sort of discussion of the issues in terms of SS1, but looking at sort of how SS1 and CSD8 relate, do you think that the sort of Romney Marsh character area point in SS1 adequately reflects that need for local regeneration?
Yes, I think it does. And in policy CSD8, there is sort of provision for further employment development at Mountfield Road, for example, which picks up on the points about regeneration. And, you know, in terms of that scheme, we have provided an update in our main matter for issue 6. So, yes, I think that still holds true.
Okay, but and you're saying that there doesn't need to be anything further in SS1 in terms of a golden thread through to CSD8 to reinforce that point, and you're content that when reading the plan as a whole, that support for local regeneration comes through sufficiently to be sound.
Yes, I think that still comes through in the policy.
I think what's sort of useful is that we sort of, I don't want to sort of spend too much time going back over too much ground in terms of SS1, but I did want to cover that point. But sort of in terms of the sort of overall sort of economic points around SS1, I'd noted that I had been provided with an additional document which had been produced between the council and Magnox in relation to specifically sort of there's some thoughts there around SS1. Now, I had a bit of a query, and that's document EX045. What's the status of that document as it stands at the moment? Does it have the status of a sort of statement of common ground, or is it just some thoughts or representation that you want me to consider?
Perhaps if I could bring in my colleague Tim Bailey at this point, who has been involved in that work with Avison Young on behalf of the NDA and Magnox.
Good afternoon, sir. Avison Young made a representation to this examination on behalf of the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority and Magnox, raising concerns that they had about there not being sort of sufficient reference to the future of Dungeness Power Station within the core strategy. So we've undergone a process where we've discussed potential policy changes to policy SS1 that would address the concerns that they raised. They've fed into that drafting, and we have a confirmation email from Avison Young saying that the wording as proposed would satisfy the concerns of both the NDA and Magnox.
Okay. I suppose my sort of simple question at this point is why is the plan unsound without it?
I think the view was taken that Magnox is an important component, economic component of the district. It's a large employer, and therefore the future of this particular site ought to be acknowledged in the plan, and that the plan is cognizant of future proposals might come forward following decommissioning, which would require a proactive approach by the council in terms of looking at future development proposals through an area action plan. At the moment, of course, we don't know what kind of proposals might come forward, their magnitude, nor what kind of impact they may have. So one can't be specific, but it's a recognition of the status of the site, its importance, and its possible future role.
Okay, but I suppose my concern is the purpose of the examination isn't to make a plan more sound, it's to address something that is indeed unsound. So that was essentially what I was saying. Why is it unsound without it?
Well, because there's an absence of recognition in the plan, and this is a core strategy which goes forward. It's meant to be strategic, and within the district's strategic compass, Magnox is quite important. So we put it forward to you on a joint basis, an agreed basis, and leave it to you whether you think it deserves a modification in order to make it sound.
Okay, thank you. That's useful to sort of think about it in those terms. And obviously, some of the wording relates to supporting text to SS1, but sort of looking down a bit further, there were some actual proposed changes to the wording of the main part of the policy itself. I had a fairly sort of simple question on the wording that's been arrived at. Is what's the implication of the recent changes to the use classes order on what's been placed in front of me, particularly in respect of the revocation of B1? Okay.
David.
At the moment, it's okay.
Sorry, sir, I've lost it from my screen. Someone's given me a hard copy. Thanks, David. Thank you very much. I can't see that the proposed wording actually, I don't think any changes have any implications actually for the proposed wording. Are you referring to anything in particular?
It was the additional wording says Dungeness A, so it's at the penultimate paragraph of the section it talks about Dungeness A should be related employment uses, employment-related training or educational purposes. So it was a simple query is that's if there's any implications or not.
Oh, I see what you mean, yeah. I don't think it does actually. I mean, those employment uses or economic uses could relate to anything within Class E. Or other industrial uses outside Class E.
Concerned about the law of unintended consequences, hence the question.
No, and I see that entirely. I mean, employment uses also include major retail schemes, and one would want to see a superstore down in that part of the district for obvious reasons.
Yes.
So we could have a look at that actually, just to make sure that we've closed off things which are not desirable.
Yes, Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I'll certainly look at it on that basis, and we can discuss it with those representing Magnox.
okay. Yeah. Well, I'll leave that one with you as an action to have a look at that again.
Of course. Yeah.
And sort of within the context of the overall wording that's been suggested that talks about an area action plan, I suppose the question is, if there is an issue, is producing an area action plan the most appropriate vehicle to do that, or is there sufficient policy coverage elsewhere in the development plan that would essentially provide for the same thing? Perhaps that's a thought for you to ponder as part of your wider pondering on the B1 issue.
Certainly, we'll look at that and give it some consideration. And when we come back with any proposed changes to the note you've already got, or to the changes you've already got, we can also include a small and concise narrative in relation to the way in which the local plan provides the framework at development management stage to guide proposals and consider them. I think the point about an area action plan is that it looks at more detail about how a scheme might be provided, and recognition in the strategic policy that a proposal might come forward provides a policy hinge, if you like, for the preparation of an action area plan, which can consider very much more detailed matters like about design, etc. And also will have to be subject to an HRA. As a plan, it would need to be subject to an HRA, which of course is a very important component of the DM process, as well as the plan making process. So it'll be a two-stage thing. The action area plan will have to be assessed, and so will any planning application that comes forward. That's another reason why an area action plan for any such proposal would be best considered on a detailed non-statutory policy basis under the umbrella of the core strategy.
Okay, thank you for that. Does anyone else have any points they wish to raise at this juncture in relation to the sort of overall evidence base and the approach to how the Romney Marsh area overall has been prepared? Before we sort of move along. Okay, so sort of moving along slightly to the overall sort of scale of development envisaged in the Romney Marsh area. What is the we'll come on to the sort of CSD8 figures in due course, but I think it's my sort of question is the overall scale of development that's planned for in the Romney Marsh area sufficiently clear in terms of what's been permitted versus what's likely to be allocated?
Yes, thank you, sir. In terms of permissions and allocations, there are a number of allocations in the Places and Policies local plan, a number of which have permission, and some of which are going through the process. And those form part of the background of, for example, housing supply in the district and our forward trajectory. The core strategy review doesn't propose any other allocations beyond the broad location there. Also, windfall developments will continue to come forward, and there is an allowance in the housing trajectory for a windfall allowance of 95 homes across the district. and those homes will continue to come forward and be judged on general development management policies throughout the core strategy review plan period.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I mean, we have sort of had, I've seen representations sort of submitted to the plan with sort of diverging views on the overall levels of development to be identified in the Romney Marsh area. Some are saying it's too low, and conversely, obviously, we've had representations suggest that they're too high. We will come on to sort of alternative options in due course, but essentially, the overall level of growth has been framed by those key constraints that we've discussed previously. And is that correct to say, Mr. Tofts?
Yes, as set out in the growth options report, it is a constrained area. There are the Dungeness series of sites of European interest for biodiversity. Large areas are subject to high flood risk, and other areas, as the growth options report sets out, are relatively remote with poor transport links. So it's not proposed within the core strategy review to make allocations beyond what is already there in terms of housing.
Mm-hmm. And we did have a discussion as part of the sort of settlement hierarchy session about the overall justification as to why perhaps the plan doesn't include percentage ratios for growth across the tiers of the hierarchy. And obviously that leads to the same position in terms of why you haven't specified any particular targets for villages or otherwise to meet. Is that essentially maintain your position is stable on that point?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
Okay. Yes, and I think you've been clear about that, and the evidence base is clear in terms of the expectation that there wouldn't be any strategic scale growth. But as I say, we do have representations on that point. I was going to come to Ms. Barton, but she's already preempted it by raising her hand. So now would be a good opportunity for you to come in and make your points on that, Ms. Barton. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, thank you. I totally agree with the council about the constraints, but I think there's some contradiction here, because the problem we have is that the large allocations are coming forward first to constitute or help with the 5-year land bank or 5-year land supply, and there allegedly won't be any allocations in the back end of the plan. But the problem is, because Otterpool Park is being reduced in the plan and the overall numbers are not coming down, that will mean an increase in windfalls. And guess where that is going to come from? It will come from Romney Marsh, and we have a couple of farmers here who are feeding land in for 50 houses here and there. And in the end, they started off with 400. They were pushed back, but those things will come forward anyway in small parcels. So in the end, you'll have a situation where Romney Marsh, which is unsuited for a large amount of development, is going to be punching way ahead of its punch, if you like, before in the first 5 years. And what will happen after the first 5 years? A new plan there'll be a new plan after 5 years that will lock in that high level of growth, and will start again and have either new allocations or a large number of windfalls coming through. So without some sort of way of putting some sort of barrier or some sort of form of containment, there will be much larger numbers of housing coming through relative to the type of constraints that Romney Marsh has. And that is the concern of many people here locally, that we are in the end, because it's going to be, because the pressure of housing is so great, and the council did not push back and say that this area could not accommodate it, the area that is free to be accommodated as Romney Marsh is the most unsuitable, is going to be actually left with much higher housing. It will happen as night follows day, because there is no way, if we are producing at, say, housing delivery, let's say, I don't know, 50 per year or 60 per year, it's not going to go down to 15 per year to fit into the rest of the local plan and allow Otterville Park to take up the slack. There's a problem that Otterville Park may not be able to deliver. And there's that point. And the second point is, and even if it does deliver, history has told us or informed us that the developers will come through with more development and it will be accepted. That is what's happened over the past. So there does need to be something that can contain the level of development. And I think one of the easiest ways would be to do that is to have a monitoring report annually that gives the allocations of delivery per character area, so that all the councils are very, very well aware of what level of delivery is coming through. At the moment, we have an annual monitoring assessment that comes through for the whole area. It doesn't give the breakdown, and I think that's a very, very important thing. Just informing people about the level of housing in relative terms that's coming through would be a good start. But I believe that there should be some policy containment, as there was in the previous local plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Tofts, what was the council's response to those points?
There was a sort of percentage allocation in the 2013 core strategy for the kind of broad amounts of development across the district, and broadly speaking, we have kept to that percentage. But with the allocation of the new garden settlement, it wasn't felt necessary or appropriate really to update those percentages. And given that currently government housing requirements are expressed as minimums, I'm not sure, how we could refuse development on a suitable, sustainable site simply because a percentage might have been exceeded somewhere. I think we would have to look at each site on its merits, in terms of windfall development, and judge it on that basis. And also, as regards an annual monitoring report, we do monitor completions annually, and we report on them. But if, for example, it was found that a percentage was being approached or being exceeded, that is effectively contributed to by a number of different sites across a wide character area, and I'm not sure we would have the powers to prevent development on sites or reduce the speed at which sites were built out. It doesn't seem to me to be a practical way forward, really.
But also, I suppose the council has also recently adopted the Places and Policies local plan document, which obviously includes a number of allocations for the new Romney area. So from that perspective, the council has identified and provided sites, carried out the process of going and preparing a local plan document.
Yes, certainly. The Places and Policies local plan looks at sites of 10 dwellings or above, and there are a range of those different sites, from relatively small ones to sites of 150 and more homes throughout the district. I thought the point that Ms. Barton was making was around the windfall development, but so that was really what I was trying to get across, that I'm not sure quite how we could refuse windfall sites on otherwise sustainable locations to meet a percentage.
And in preparing Places and Policies local plan, obviously that includes sites that feed into your land supply calculations as well, to give you that position. Okay. Ms. Barton, you still had your hand up. If you want to...
Yes, I mean, I appreciate the pressure the council's under, but I mean, my point did relate to windfalls as taking up the slack, but it also relates to the allocation in the places and policies. Those big allocations are coming forward earlier, and they are going to be built out. And allegedly, this area is going to rely on a lot more windfalls. But the problem will be is that, and Mr. Tofts has agreed that it will be very difficult to knock back windfalls if they are allegedly sustainable. But the problem is, if we are going to, as an area, punch way above our weight in the first 5 years, and then we have the usual thing that the plan starts again, it locks in that high development, and then we start again with big allocations, which I mean, and which will inevitably happen. And if they don't, we have farmers there waiting in the wind with, well, I mean, I can name the farmers, I don't want to, but they're waiting there in the wind to put through windfield developments. And so what they'll do is just put them in, rather than put them in large banks of 400 or 500, they'll just put them in 400, 50 to 100, and we'll achieve the same thing. So there has to be something. I mean, the council has acknowledged the constraints. There has to be something in policy that doesn't allow the situation to get out of hand just because it becomes a numbers game. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I understand the point, and I suppose also the point you're raising is, are other locations in the strategy ultimately going to have to disproportionately provide dwellings earlier on in the plan period whilst the new settlement gets going on? But I don't want to sort of spend too much time this afternoon going down that road, because we are going to have a dedicated session on housing delivery and the supply of housing land in due course. So, but unless you had any final points on that, Mr. Tofts, I was going to move along. But
just to say, in terms of local plan allocations, around about 60% of the development is assigned to the urban area, and 23% to the North Downs, and 17% to the Romney Marsh area in terms of new allocations.
Thank you. Okay, I think we've probably explored that point as far as we can for the moment, without treading on the toes of future sessions. We'll come back to that again. What I wanted to sort of move on to next was a discussion that we sort of semi-parked from yesterday in respect of the London Ashford Airport. And what I wanted to have a discussion on really was, I've obviously seen, and hopefully participants have seen, the documents that have come forward since yesterday. But just as a sort of starter for 10, as they say, what I wanted to just understand is, what's the precise situation at the moment in respect of the planning approvals at London Ashford Airport? Who wants to come in on this, whether it's the council or perhaps shall I start with the council, and then if I need to then bring in colleagues from WSP, sorry, representatives from WSP.
Certainly so, if the council want to.
Your default to Mr. Tofts first, right? Okay.
And no, I'm happy to hand over to London Ashford Airport. I've asked for confirmation from my development management colleagues, but I haven't heard back as yet.
In that case, if that's you, Mr. McGrath, if you can just succinctly set out the position for me as it stands.
Yes. So the consents were granted in 2013. The runway extension has been implemented. That was implemented in 2016. And we've got a certificate of lawfulness confirming that. I mean, should I go on? So that's where we are. I mean, should I go on there and just talk a bit? So do you want to go in to talk about, deal specifically with the question you've got, sir, about the airport and what's happening with the airport generally, or?
Yes, well, my sort of first point is that obviously there's been various discussions about the status of what has or hasn't been implemented. So I wanted to just understand that firsthand, and then I wanted to talk a little bit about, in terms of the representations, about what's being sought, and then obviously I wanted to go into the potential soundness issues as they affect the plan, and then have a discussion around the documents that were produced yesterday or have been submitted since yesterday.
Because I think just as the background, obviously the consents, was 2013. There was a long period. There was legal challenges, consent implemented, and sort of from probably 2016 up till certainly last year, discussions have been taking place about purchasing the land to actually build out the Romney extension, and that has become a very tedious process. I think is probably a good way of describing it. The land is owned by the Thompson family, who are farmers, and there are 9 brothers. And I think there has been a lot of going around in circles, frankly, trying to do a deal. And I think we've oscillated between the airport trying to do a deal, buying the land off them, getting all 9 brothers to agree to the sale. And then we've gone back to saying, well, actually, we can't do the deal. Let's CPO the land. And we've just effectively gone between the two for a number of years. I mean, David Hainsworth is here, and maybe we come on a bit later. David can tell you the sort of most up-to-date position with that and the proposals for purchasing the land. But I think the sort of big ticket answer to all of this is that the owners, Fowl Holdings, are still fully committed to the airport and want to invest in the airport. And talking about Romney Marsh and regeneration, we think the airport has got to be a key factor in terms of bringing regeneration and creating employment in the marsh.
Thank you. No, that's helpful. Thank you, Mr. McGrath. So moving on to the sort of the documents that have been put forward. Now, your initial representations were concerned that the council's approach of effectively sort of seeking down the line, if further development proposals were brought forward, that an area action plan would be produced, and there was discussion around perhaps some of the challenges about including something more specific in the plan due to the current uncertainty. But it looks to me, from reading the statement that's been provided, I noticed there's two iterations. One which has been agreed between yourselves and the council, and then there's some further thoughts that you may have on that. That your position has pivoted somewhat on that. Is that
yes, I think we're pretty much in agreement now. I think in fairness, I think there's possibly a bit of a breakdown of communication between the airport and the council. I think the previous manager of the airport before Mr. Hainsworth, Hanny Matlack, I think he got bogged down. I think he lost enthusiasm for pushing things forward at the airport. I think the council, and I'll tell me if I'm wrong here, I think they sort of thought, well, we got the consent and nothing's happened. Is anything really going to happen? Since certainly Mr. Hainsworth has come in, we have re-engaged with the council. I think we're pretty much on the same page now that things are going to move forward. There are prospects of moving forward pretty quickly with things. I think we've had a good dialogue. We're happy with the wording of the policy as agreed. We did have a few tweaks, and it is literally a couple of words in the policy, but I think otherwise we're on the same page. I think we know we can work with the council going forward. And the only thing I would say, so is just if we haven't got a complete agreement on some of the wording, if we had, after today's session, I'm sure we would get to a position where we've got an agreement on the wording.
Okay, thank you for that. Ms. Barr, I can see your hand up. I just want to come back to the council on a couple of points before I bring you in, if that's okay. So really, I suppose my question to the council again is a fairly sort of similar one to that regarding the power station issue is the tweaks that have been agreed, or the amendments that have been made, proposed to be made to SS1, talk about supporting small scale operational development and as required to maintain the airport use. I suppose my question is again, why is the plan as submitted unsound, and why is that? And is there anything else, within the context of the development plan that would support these what appears to be relatively small scale operational development?
Yeah. Starting at the high level, the policy as drafted does give recognition to the importance of the airport, and therefore looks forward to, and under its umbrella, an area action plan can come forward for the site, which would have to satisfy the habitats regulations, etc., etc. So all the same points made in relation to Magnox would apply here as well. We understood, and we may have been wrong about this, but we understood that part of the airport's concern was that there needed to be some acknowledgement that they would need to undertake smaller scale operational development, which was integral to the airport and required to maintain the airport use, and wanted some recognition of that, and that's why we included those words. Otherwise, if that is not the case, frankly, the policy as drafted is perfectly good and effective.
Okay, thank you. I'll come to Ms. Barton next, and then I'll come to you, Mr. McGrath, if you want to. I don't know, or your hand's disappeared down again. Ms. Barton.
Yes, firstly, I'm pleased that Magnox has put their points forward, because it seems unreasonable that the airport should get such high coverage. But anyway, that's not the main point. My problem is, and I think the problem for the local community, is that the framework for development has been set down with the planning application for 500,000 passengers per annum, a new runway extension of a new terminal. That framework is there. That, as I understand it, even under permitted development rights, and the airport acknowledges that they can do a number of these small developments, so they are not being impeded in any way. The point about Mr. Thompson not providing land is just a convenient excuse for not developing, or it was a mud face-saving exercise. If Mr. O'Leary came down with Ryanair and said he proposed a new service, there would be compulsory purchase order immediately. So this is just an excuse just for a bit of face-saving exercise. That there is already a framework there, and not only that, that framework was right at the perimeter of environmental constraints and nuclear safety constraints. So if they want to expand again, it's going up to 2 million passengers per annum before they've even got to 500,000. So it's completely illogical, and the excuse for Mr. Thompson doesn't hold any weight at all. And the third point I'd like to make, or the second point in relation to this point, is that it is totally and utterly unreasonable for the airport to put huge pressure on the council to change these policies when local people haven't been given the opportunity to make their case for greater clarity. Because what this is all about is not about the fact that there isn't a framework for growth. It's the fact that they are hedging. The airport is hedging its bets. Okay, what they want is we're very unlikely to be able to enact our extension, but what we want to be able to do is to have maximum flexibility with regard to redeveloping the site. That is the real issue, and we as local people want clarity on that point. The application hasn't been enacted. There is no excuse for not enacting it other than that it's being uncommercial. So I would like to propose, or on behalf of the local residents, is that in this, and this would be, in terms of soundness, would be totally consistent, because why would you have an area action plan in order to do this small amount of a little piddly bit of development that's been proposed, which we already knew would possibly happen anyway. What we need here in this I'm quoting from the Common Ground statement on point 8, and when the so it says, should development proposal come forward for the redevelopment of whole or part of Lydd Airport, the council will work with the airport local community and other stakeholders to prepare to adopt an area action plan for the site. Now that is totally logical, because there is no need for an area action plan if the airport were going ahead with its development. An area action plan is required because the site is what the airport is really proposing is that what they want is to redevelop whole or part of that site, and it's still possible for them to do that and keep their helicopter air rescue service. That would be completely possible. So it is unfair on the local community that they cannot seek that clarity. The airport made a big fuss about the clarity. We, the local people, need clarity about what is being proposed, and that would be wholly, in terms of soundness, that would be totally consistent. It is totally inconsistent when you have a framework for development and to begin turning around and asking for an area action plan, because the area action plan is all about doing a big redevelopment. And it's quite possible that really behind the scenes what the airport is proposing to have a big Amazon site there. But that is not the point. We need that clarity, and that is what this is all about. It is not about extending an airport. It is an uncommercial situation. And given the fact that the airport has been able to put a large amount of documentation in, I'd like to quote from the Department of Air Transport, Cranfield University, their report that was published at the public inquiry, and I will quote the first point. The above analysis shows that this is highly unlikely that Lydd Airport could make a positive operating profit at levels of annual passenger throughput of 500,000 passengers per annum. The only way the airport of such a traffic volume would be profitable would be to attract lucrative offshore oil industry, a flourishing business park, or other activities on the airport that were not related to commercial air transport activities. Now, we didn't need Cranfield to come up with this, but because we had experts within our own organisation that sort of actually told us that. But we sought this third party validation. That is the issue. Lydd Airport is not profitable. It will not be profitable, particularly now in a post-COVID situation. And the reason for that is because of the huge amount of restricted airspace that it has above in its surrounding area. It means it has non-standard flight procedures, and most airlines will not touch it. And my final point is the second part of the Cranfield work that we were proposing, but we decided to actually focus on nuclear safety rather than run the economic side of the arguments, and which was probably the wrong thing to do, although everything was ignored, was that we were going to sound out, or Cranfield was going to sound out the key operators, and they did sound out a few key operators, and one was Ryanair, and they said they wouldn't touch it. So it's what we want is clarity. This airport is an uncommercial proposition. The real issue is this should be redeveloped, and they are seeking redevelopment of whole or part of our airport site. And that means the only way to be consistent and sound with an area action plan is to reword that statement to talk about redevelopment of whole or part of this site. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. I could see a hand from Mr. McGrath, and then I'll perhaps ask the council to respond to all of what they've heard. Mr. McGrath.
Thank you, sir. I mean, just sort of starting at the beginning, please do not be confused that Ms. Barton represents the local community. She clearly doesn't. And I would say, I think she's representing herself, and her talking about we and the local community. I've been involved in this process since we put the application in 2000 and we started 2003, right the way through. It is absolutely crystal clear that the majority of people around the airport want the airport expansion. Absolutely crystal clear. So it isn't you. She is not representing the local community. The local community want the airport to be expanded. The things you started saying there, sir, I know it's probably a fairly tedious read, but it is appended to our statements. If you read the inspector's report and the Secretary of State's decisions, all these points were made just untrue. It's not viable. There's going to be problems with the nuclear power station. None of it's true. It was all looked at. The inquiry, I think, started in February. I think it finished in September. I think within the second week we realised, and I think the inspector realised, that it was all just nonsense. The reality is the impact on biodiversity, the sites of nature conservation value and biodiversity value, it's all absolutely easy to deal with. There aren't issues about nuclear, on threat to nuclear and planes crashing into the nuclear power station. All of it was looked at in detail. All of it was found to be acceptable. There's no point in going back to all these things. We've looked at them again. It was fantasy then, it's fantasy now. And if you do want to hear from the horse's mouth rather than the Spartan's conjecture about what the airport can do and what's going to happen with the airport, speak to Mr. Hainsworth. He's here. You know, you've asked about what is going to happen about the airport. I do think it would be worth letting him explain where he's got to with the airport and what his view is going forward with it.
It's not my intention to sort of play ping pong on this issue. To be honest, I think I'm clear on everyone's respective positions, and I understand them. And obviously, what I've got to do is take a view on whether what's currently contained within the plan is sound, and equally, if there is a potential soundness concern, whether there is a need for main modification to remedy that. So I'm going to have to go away and give consideration to the documents that are in front of me, and obviously I've seen the further suggested wording that you put forward separately, which provides something else, some further language in there. Ms. Barton, I can see a hand. Is there any new point?
Well, yes.
Rather than, I don't want to get into a sort of.
No. I mean, sorry, I'm not going to get in. I want to know whether we could actually put in our own wording, if I can submit that to you, on the wording that we're proposing, given that the airport has have been able to submit a document.
Well, I mean, at the moment, I need to be clear whether there is a soundness issue. I have no immediate issue arising if you chose to do that, but obviously all parties would need to see that. But obviously, I haven't formed any views on whether what is currently submitted is sound or unsound at the moment. What I'm trying to do is to explore all the issues that have been put forward. So I'm happy for you to do that.
Okay, well, we'll do that.
You go via the programme officer, and that will obviously need to be shared with the parties for any further comments on that. But as I say, that needs to be on a without prejudice basis that I haven't yet formed any views. Mr. Tofts.
So, sorry, it's me. It's me. I've already made submissions in relation to the changes which we have said we would be happy to accept, provided you felt it was necessary in the interest of soundness to incorporate those changes. In considering that, I just thought you ought to know that we've had a quick look again at the Places and Policies Local Plan. What it does is provide a framework for consideration of development proposals. It doesn't provide any specific support for the small scale operational type of development that may be required to maintain the airport use. So the question for you is whether or not the existence of a development management framework which could consider any such proposals is sufficient, or whether it needs specific support at the core strategy level.
Thank you. No, that's helpful. I'll take all of those points into account in my consideration of the issue. But thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Mr. Tofts, just to sort of conclude on this point, then. Oh, you're muted, Mr. Tofts. Sorry, we can't hear you.
Sorry, just very quickly, sir. When considering different forms of wording, we just wanted to highlight to you that in terms of general impacts on biodiversity, there is adopted local plan policy NE2, which deals with the hierarchy of sites from international sites through to local sites of biodiversity value.
Thank you. So I'm just making notes on that. Okay, thank you. I think we've probably covered that that matter in quite a bit of detail. So unless there are any other points, I think everyone's had an opportunity to make their views on that known. I was going to move on, which brings us to I think we've covered all the issues on the area action plan. On to point 2 on the agenda, which specifically related to policy CSD 8 for New Romney itself. And I did ask an overall question on the basis for the strategy for New Romney, and is it justified and what underpins it? And obviously we've talked about the overall strategic approach, how you've gone about that. What I wanted to understand from the council is, obviously in your statement that you've said that there's a need to retain CSD 8 to guide the remaining development in the broad location. And that's essentially your positions. That's correct.
Yes, that is correct. So as we discussed with the other sites this morning, Folkestone, Seafront, and Shorncliffe Garrison.
Yeah, and the policy is essentially sort of largely unchanged with only modest changes. I suppose sort of perhaps comes back to a point we discussed a little earlier. I'm just going to flip forward in my papers. Is, I suppose, coming back to that point around sort of local regeneration, local housing needs, etc. Does leaving the policy wording so similar to that which was produced in the 2013 core strategy, is that approach appropriate in terms of addressing that sort of local regeneration issue?
We feel the policy has served well for local regeneration in its current form, and you know, it highlights things like the expanded Mountfield Road Industrial Estate and other kinds of areas as regards you know, retail and tourism and employment. So we feel that the broad thrust of the policy is still appropriate.
Okay. And we sort of discussed a little bit in terms of the approaching and whether or not there needs to be amendments to SS1 in relation to the Dungeness power station. I suppose would it be fair to say that the effects of the decommissioning are most closely felt by New Romney principally, or is it a much wider issue? Is New Romney the principal settlement that's likely to be affected by future decommissioning? And how has that kind of influenced the strategy that you put forward?
I just consult with one of my colleagues, if I may.
Okay, yeah.
Good afternoon. Just to pick up on that point, yes, New Romney would be affected, but also Lydd town as well, as well as Dungeness through to Littlestone. So those key settlements surrounding the Dungeness power station.
Okay, that's helpful. And in terms of the approach to sort of supporting local employment, obviously that's coming through the Mountfield Road Industrial Estate expansion. And you've got a specific allocation for that in the PPLP. That's correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
And that was there was a proposal that's been secured through funding from decommissioning agencies. Is that right? To support skilled jobs, retraining, etc. That kind of.
Yes, that's correct. I think within the statement we also might make reference to a socio-economic regeneration strategy that was prepared by Magnox and the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, along with the council, which looks at sort of regeneration opportunities to mitigate against the impacts of the decommissioning of the power station as a strategy looking forward.
And did that strategy sort of contain any actions that needed to be sort of translated through? Because obviously that's part of the overall sort of economic basis against which the plan's been prepared. Was there any sort of actions or outcomes from that strategy that that need to be embedded more closely in the plan, or are they there and they're just sort of perhaps not overtly drawn out as a flow from that document?
I think it's the latter, that they're there, but it's not overtly sort of drawn out.
Okay. No, that's very helpful. Mr. Toft, you have a hand?
Yes, sorry, just briefly to update on the issue of Mountfield Road. Funding was announced for that of 3.53 million from the South East Local Enterprise Partnership in November. So that slightly updates what was in our statement for July, I think.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Does anyone have any initial points in terms of the sort of economic? Toft, you still have a hand. Is that as a legacy hand? Was it? I wanted to then sort of, if there aren't any other points on the supporting sort of economic regeneration in New Romney, I wanted to move sort of in a bit more detail in terms of scale, type, and location of development. And having been out to see the site a few months ago, prior to lockdown number 2, so several months ago, obviously I'm mindful and also looking at the evidence documents that large parts of the broad location is now mostly built out. Is that correct?
Yes, but by way of an update, the broad allocation was for 300 dwellings, and planning permission exists for 290. In terms of completions, the most recent figures we have are that 140 homes have been completed, which is about just under half. There were 32 under construction, and the remainder not started. There is another planning application on a part of the site known as Hope All Saints Garden Centre, which hasn't yet been determined.
Right.
And that is for 25 homes.
So that's okay. So I was going to sort of come to, because obviously some of the evidence in relation to, I was going to come on to sort of delivery in terms of the scale of development in due course, but in your Matter 8 statements in Appendix 3, I've got a couple of tables. I've got Table 1, and then on page 32, I've got another part of Table 1. So you're saying that the 300 on page 26 of your statement on Matter 8, and that breaks down there that at that point in time we'd got three schemes within that 300 that had got permission, and then there were another couple that hadn't, and then there's a note following that for that site reference Y181404/FH had been granted permission in the 1920 monitoring year. So in terms of the figures you've given me, I'm just trying to trace those back to what's in your statement. So is what you've told me a further update to what's in the Matter 8 statement?
Maybe it's something that I can pick up with you. So the New Romney broad location is broken down into 4 key parcels. You've got the potato factory, the land opposite, and then you've got the land adjacent to Hope All Saints Garden Centre, and then Hope All Saints Garden Centre itself. The potato factory, which is reference Y150710 for 55, that has been completed. Now, the land opposite the potato factory, which is Y170674 for 109, that is the site that's currently under construction. There is an update on that site in that we had an application that redesigned part of that site, which increased the capacity to 118. That was in response that there was a high demand for smaller houses than what was proposed by the original application. So the scheme was able to be redesigned to increase capacity on that site. The site below that, Y180327, that was for 8. That didn't form part of the broad location allocation. It was a site that was directly adjacent. It was a small infill site, so that was some over and above. And then going down, you've got the land adjacent to Hope All Saints Garden Centre, which is for 117. That now has outline planning permission. And then Hope All Saints Garden Centre, there was an application in for 27 that got refused. An alternative application has come in for 25, which in discussions with the case officer for that site, that has been given resolution to grant subject to Section 106 agreement being finalised, and that's expected either this side of Christmas or soon afterwards. So that hopefully sort of gives you an update on those figures. And I think we agreed in the last session that in advance of discussion on Matter 8 that we would provide yourselves with an updated trajectory that sort of brings the latest position in more detail to you.
Yes, I was going to say, I'm sure my colleague Mr. Ward, who's probably got an itchy raised hand finger, was going to mention it. But yes, if you already said you're going to provide a note, I would have probably asked you for it.
Yeah. No, the trajectory is a moving feast all the time.
Okay. So in terms of what Mr. Toff said, effectively of the 300, then we've got about 290 in some way with planning permission. So I'll just come back to sort of what we've got in terms of CSD8 overall.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose my question is the net amount of development that is actually being allocated in this plan period, is that sort of properly reflected in what the wording of the policy actually says? On the basis that a vast amount of it already has planning permission or already been built. Who wants to pick up on that?
The policy talks development as a whole should provide around 300 dwellings, and we are currently we have planning permission for 290 with the further site of 25 not yet determined. So we think it remains in line with policy.
Okay, I'll thank you. That's useful. I suppose where I sort of wanted to go was obviously on the basis that there are still some schemes which have outlined that there whilst there is a limited quantum that doesn't have any formal planning permission established at the moment, but there still is a need to, from the council's perspective, to retain the policy largely unchanged to guide the remnants of what's left. So that's essentially what's being said.
Yes, as we talked about earlier this morning with Folkestone Seafront and with Shorncliffe Garrison, a similar kind of situation applies here, albeit that development is more advanced perhaps on this site than the others.
Yeah, it does seem to be fairly advanced when I viewed it on site a few months ago. So, okay. Does anyone else have any points on the notwithstanding the we're going to need a note on the position? Does anyone have any points in terms of the scale and location of what's being put forward in this plan, as opposed to what may or may not be contained in the PPLP? Ms. Barton, you have a point on this?
My point is that it speaks to my point that we've already had planning permission for almost 300 of the major allocation. What is going to happen for the rest of the plan period? And there'll be very, very considerable pressure on Romney Marsh to deliver, given that we've actually used our allocation up very early in the plan period. And it gets back to this point that Romney Marsh needs some sort of protection, because, as Mr. Toff said, if someone comes forward with a viable windfall, and that can be up to 50 houses now, they'll be given planning permission, irrespective of the constraints faced by the district. That's what's happened.
Thank you.
So what I'm doing is underlining my points. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. But in terms of from the council's perspective, Mr. Tofts, whilst a considerable amount of the broad location either has planning permission or has been built, the allocations in the PPLP, which we're obviously, whilst we're not here to examine those, but there are a number of those that are established in the development plan, and I'm going to assume that some have permission, some perhaps don't, but they're clearly.
Yes, that is the case. I would need to consult a different document to check exactly the status of those sites. There are, in the Places and Policies local plan, there are 15 sites, and the varying in size from around 9 dwellings to up to 85 dwellings.
And perhaps because of the nature of how this plan's been constructed, there isn't because it's come after the PPLP, there isn't that golden thread that you might otherwise have seen if those documents are produced either as one or more closely in parallel. That's clear, because obviously what this plan doesn't do is include reference to the quantum of development that you've allocated in the PPLP, does it?
It does, in so much as it is included in the trajectory and the housing land supply, and so it's taken into account through that process, and that those sites contribute to the overall totals that we have to find.
Thank you. I understand. I understand the approach you've taken, I think. And obviously, looking at New Romney overall, because of that point, and you've got those sites allocated in another part of the development plan. Overall, in terms of what's put forward collectively across the development plan and what we're here to examine in terms of the core strategy, the overall scale of development is broadly sufficient to maintain New Romney's position in the settlement hierarchy.
Yes, it reflects that. We believe, yes.
Okay, thank you. Sort of, unless anyone's got any sort of points that haven't been made in terms of the scale of the development. I wanted to then just talk about sort of alternative options. Sort of looking at that overall, and again thinking about what we talked about in terms of constraints and otherwise, there had been representations that I noted that indicated that the council should have looked at other scales of development. There was a representation that talked about a much larger scale of development, possibly with a road. But what I want to understand is, were any other scales of residential development tested as part of the preparation of this plan?
No, not as part of this plan. There was a site submitted for the local plan, a large development at New Romney, which was brought forward, but the landowners for that were in dispute, and we felt the site wasn't deliverable. So.
But in any event, for the reasons even notwithstanding the land ownership concerns, were those options reasonable options for the purposes of testing through the sustainability appraisal?
Yes, we believe they were.
And they were tested, and that higher scale was tested, and then was subsequently.
I mean, the scale we got in the plan has been tested through sustainability appraisal. The evidence base in terms of growth options, etc., reveals considerable constraints. So there wouldn't be a reasonable alternative to test through that process.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. Did anyone else have any other points on alternative options while we're at this juncture? No, I see no hands in silence. Okay, I sort of wanted to move on then to policy requirements, and I wanted to start with a discussion that sort of follows probably one you've had earlier on this morning with my colleague in relation to the affordable housing requirements for each of the character areas. So probably won't be surprised to know what I'm going to ask next. But what I wanted to understand is, in terms of the policy requirements, is the 30%, bearing in mind we had the discussion about the overall affordable housing percentage yesterday, is the 30% affordable housing justified?
No, it's not. It should be 22%, so it should be aligned.
What I wanted to understand was, obviously, I know the discussion, so I didn't participate in the discussion this morning, but bearing in mind that there's more extant permissions in New Romney, what I wanted to make sure was, I took the point that there have been schemes elsewhere in the urban area that had much lower percentage figures, and therefore they didn't justify a higher figure. What I was concerned with is we're perhaps dealing with a broad location here that has more extant permissions, and therefore was New Romney a special case, for want of a better phrase, based on what's been consented?
No, I mean, the assessment of need hasn't identified that we ought to be requiring more from New Romney, and that's certainly not borne out in the work that's been done. So it should be 22% in the round to reflect the work that's been done. I'm not quite sure to what extent existing proposals are meeting the 22%. I'm looking around me for assistance here to see if the position here is similar to the position elsewhere in terms of flexibility.
I can probably help you with that.
Riley, in a moment. I just wanted to just go back, because in table 1 of the council's hearing statement, it talks about the criterion A, and it talks about the schemes, the New Romney Potato Company site, and further development will come forward. It says, in addition, the applicant has agreed to provide 30% affordable housing on site and a range of unit sizes. So the point was, because of those level of permissions, what I wanted to get was a detailed understanding was if those have already been consented at an additional amount, again, lot of unintended consequences if there was a variance in the figure, whilst the need figure remains the same, as this policy is effectively a roll forward to guide the remnants of what's left of the broad location, whether there was going to be a problem with simply aligning that with CSD1.
I don't see it as a problem, so again, I'm just wondering whether, just bear with me for a second, would you?
Well, I was just thinking we're sort of approaching the dawn of 3:30 when I was looking to take a short break. So perhaps now might be an appropriate point to have a short adjournment for a comfort break, and for you to have a brief.
Yeah, I just want to find out actually what the sites are delivering in terms of affordable housing, to give you some factual background.
Well, I think what we'll do is, if everyone's okay, I'd like to take a short adjournment now, just to give everyone a bit of a screen break, me included. So, but I was proposing perhaps a slightly shorter one. So perhaps if we take 20 minutes and come back at 3:45.
Very good, sir.
Okay, well, in that case, we'll adjourn and come back at 3:45. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, everybody. It's 3:45. I hope you're all still back with us, and the session is resumed. I'll come first to Mr. Cheddarevian. Is it yourself to pick up where we left off a little while ago?
I'm going to ask Mr. Hammond if he would just update you with respect to the affordable delivery under CSD 8.
Yes, thank you, sir. We've undertaken some analysis of the Section 106 requirements with respect to affordable housing provision. So running through the 4 parcels in turn, the 55 unit parcel contributed no affordable housing requirement, but that was a challenging brownfield site that went through the appropriate check and balance at the time. The 109 unit parcel has actually delivered 33 units on the ground, and so in that regard the policy has been enacted with actual delivery. The 117 unit scheme that benefits from outline consent would require 30% affordable housing provision, but we've done a sensitivity test to see what 22% would look like, and I can run through the numbers in a second. And then the outstanding parcel, for which there is a currently live planning application for 25 units, would deliver 6 units at a rate of 22% delivery, or otherwise 8 units if the 30% were required. And so rounding those numbers against a total broad location of 306 dwellings, the delivery will be either 65 units if remaining parcels to be delivered would deliver at that lower rate of 22%, or otherwise 76 units if they were to come forward with no change. And so attributing a percentage against those numbers, the range would be 21.2% up to 24.8%. So broadly in line with what we've been discussing, which is a 22% policy requirement, and I can provide you with those figures in due course.
Thank you. That's helpful if you would. So yes, I think it is clear that there is obviously going to need to be a modification there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, sir.
That's okay. That's helpful. So sort of turning sort of across the rest of the sort of policy requirements, my sort of attention was sort of focused on that affordable housing requirement predominantly, but obviously in terms of what the council, you said in your statement, is essentially most of the policy requirements, because of the nature of the scheme, the amount of built development and that which has got permission, most of those policy requirements are either delivered and funded or are funded and yet to be delivered. Is that the case?
Yes, as set out in table 1, we have the Section 106 contributions from the former Marsh Potato Company site, and that lists contributions for adult education, social services, education, etc. And then Appendix 3 are Section 106 contributions for the land opposite Doorland, and you've got the amount paid and the date received, and so on. For Appendix 4 is land adjoining Hope All Saints Garden Centre, and that is the one we've been talking about recently, and that is the one to be determined.
That's helpful. That is helpful, thank you. So in terms of, you've obviously also helpfully set out for me what those mechanisms are in terms of principally coming through Section 106. I suppose my query was, are there any other sources of funding that are being sought to deliver the infrastructure requirements, particularly for New Romney, in terms of other government funding, LEP funding, county council funding?
I've I mentioned the Southeast LEP funding earlier. We are also a CIL authority, and my colleague James Hammond would be able to talk more about that, I'm sure. But there are other sources of funding available to the council.
Yes, I didn't have a. It was more a case was ensuring that there was a tie-up if there were any significant infrastructure items that hadn't been funded, whether it was whether the plan was clear enough in terms of whether the expectation is that they're going to be delivered through Section 106 funding, or if they're, in order to bring those forward, other sources of funding were necessary. But I think on the basis of what you've said in terms of the amount of completed and committed development, it doesn't appear that there's further concern in that regard that I've got anyway at the moment.
No, sir. Sorry, I misunderstood your question. Yeah, it's to date we have secured the infrastructure through Section 106 funding. Yes.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any points on what we've just discussed before I then move on to highway impacts? No, I don't see any hands up. Again, I think overall you've set out in your statement very helpfully that the requirements in relation to highways are set out in the Section 106 agreements, and they've got relevant triggers, albeit some of those triggers haven't yet been reached in terms of what's required overall. I suppose again, just thinking about, because the policy is quite significantly sort of rolling forward what's been set out in the past, is the policy sort of clear enough in terms of what, if anything, remains to be delivered?
We believe it is clear enough, but if you want more of the detail, my colleague James Hammond knows the highways background, and I'm sure could give you some more of the details.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful if you could.
Okay, yes, thank you, sir. So criterion G of policy CSD8 requires the identification of appropriate off-site highway mitigation measures to ameliorate highway impacts. And in accordance with criterion G, a number of off-site highway improvements have been secured by the local planning authority following extensive and robust appraisal by the local highway authority. The schemes of highway mitigation that have been secured in accordance with the 3 planning permissions that have been granted, to which we have referred today in respect to the broad location, are as set out in table 2.1 of our evidence submitted to the examination. And running through those, the table populates an amount of information to include pedestrian cycle connectivity improvements in relation to the potato factory site, which was granted under a Y10 consent. There's also highways and high street improvements, and payment has been made against that requirement. There also works to improve the junction of Cockreed Lane, St Mary's Road, and that scheme was implemented by the promoter/developer prior to first occupation. And then there are further requirements that have not yet been triggered, but have been secured through consented permissions.
Thank you. Yes, I've got that. I've got that table in front of me. That's helpful. Thank you. I think obviously, as you say, you set out the position of retaining those requirements in policies to obviously cover the remaining permissions, or in case there's a potential of anything unimplemented may lapse. So I didn't have anything further in terms of that part of what you set out in the table. Does anyone else have any points on that before I move on to the link road? No? Okay, splendid. What I'm just sort of keen to understand is that the link, you've indicated in your statement that there's no relationship between the requirement for the delivery of the link road and any impediment to delivering any of the further residential development in the broad location. But you've also raised some concerns around the deliverability of that link road due to land acquisition concerns. Is that position still the case?
Yes, to talk through the matter in the fuller sense, when the board location was proposed as an allocation, it was subject to very extensive master planning exercise and included provision for a link road, and that is duly captured under criterion C of policy CSD8, which requires that land proposed for residential development must have a sufficient level of internal connection through providing a new movement link through the site, appropriately designed. But the wording does not explicitly require the provision of a link road. It just talks about a connection, and so one can take that as far as they may wish. It's in respect of the link road, the consents that have come forward would not prohibit the ability for the link road to be delivered. Essentially, what it amounts to is the internal estate roads through respective parcels, and the idea is that the northern link can meet the southern link in the middle, and at the moment that middle link is not provided because of land ownership challenges. But the key point to make is that there are no limitations on occupations of any units against those consented schemes. There's no dependency on the link road being provided for occupations to then prevail. Notwithstanding that, there is a current application in the system that is still out to consultation, whereby the promoter of one of the parcels has separately made a planning application to provide the link road. So there's every intention that one of the promoters would inevitably bring that forward if consent is granted.
Okay. And so in essence, the requirement to include that criterion C is to effectively facilitate that link road should it be able to be delivered and come forward.
That's right. I mean, in a purely in a technical sense, in terms of highway modelling, the link road to function as a highway connection is not needed, but in a practical sense, there's every good reason to provide it.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you. And yes, I've assumed the language in terms of new movement link is the link road, but as I say, you think that provides flexibility, does it?
Yes, it does, sir. And it's been obviously sense checked with the local highway authority, and they are supportive of the wording.
Thank you. I suppose my sort of follow-up question is does the council have any role in securing the land if there were land ownership challenges in order to ultimately sort of achieve one of the plan's aims? Or is there something you're just going to continue to look to the development sector to bring forward?
Somewhat perversely, sir, the land in question is actually owned by the county council, but not as highway authority land. It's I think it was reserved land for a neighbouring primary school, is my recollection there. So I think sir, it's tied up in historical covenants, and so there's a need for those covenants to be removed and otherwise dealt with before the link road delivery can then proceed. It's nothing more than that. It was just one of these peculiarities over kind of a legacy matter with land registry title.
Okay, so that's
and the fact that a planning application is live and in the system to deliver the link road would suggest that there's every intention to do so.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Just sort of on the wider point around some of the infrastructure side of things, I was just flipping through the statements, but in your statement, you sort of indicated potentially a main modification to bring table 2.2 into the scope of the plan, which was the table that set out all of those requirements. I'm just trying to find it. Apologies. You're attempting to conduct a virtual examination. I appear to have generated an excess of paper that I may or may not have otherwise done, so forgive me.
Just to assist you there, so I think you're referring to paragraph 2.55 of the councillor's evidence.
That's the one.
Yep.
Sorry, yes, it's table 2.1. That's it. No, I said 2.2. Yes. I mean, I think obviously you made that as a suggestion, but I think I'm not sure there's a potential soundness issue that necessarily requires the bringing in of a quite a significant level of very fine detail into what is a strategic document on that basis. So I'm not sure I have any particular concerns in that regard, but I just wanted to make that point. Now, did anyone else have any comments on the highway implications in terms of CSD8 and all the link road? No. We've probably covered earlier on in the agenda the timing and rate of housing delivery and viability aspects, on the basis that I think because of the nature of what you've told me during the session, and because of the nature of what effectively remains to be sort of considered in terms of new Romney, viability has obviously been considered and dealt with at the planning application stage. But I didn't know if you just wanted to sort of provide a final sort of summary in terms of the overall position on viability on CSD8. Mr. Briley was going to come in earlier. Apologies, and we didn't quite go there in the end.
I'm more than happy to do that for you. Yes, I mean you're absolutely right. A significant proportion of the housing numbers in this location have already been delivered. So there actually is quite a good reference point for us to determine whether the assumptions we use against the ones that haven't yet happened are correct and relevant. And when we tested all of the sites, including the ones that have been delivered, but using our generic assumptions, and we were able to confirm that they all were viable and therefore able to support the policies that were being presented. And that it aligns up to the assumptions presented for the actual application submitted, if you see what I mean, in terms of that's what they've done. So I feel comfortable that that we can, the viability is there and suitable to achieve the policies set out. And the housing delivery, I think the rates we've got there are, they reflect the location and the sort of more rural approach to it compared to, say, the seafront and the type of units. And I feel comfortable that they are well within the number of deliveries that we're seeing across the borough. So I think from a delivery point of view, I think we've delivered half of them anyway, so that's a good benefit. We've certainly got enough time in the remaining of the local plan to deliver the remaining amount, and even if the rates slow down significantly. So I think overall, I'm quite happy with the viability position on these sites.
Thank you, Mr. Briley. That was helpful. Does anyone else have any points on viability before we move on? No. As we're sort of drawing towards the we've sort of last part of the agenda, I'm just going back over my sort of final points, and we had a discussion about other sort of main modifications, but there was a further main modification that needed to be considered, and that was one that was raised in a statement from Natural England in relation to the airport, but and it was a specific one in relation to the wording around habitats regulations assessment.
Forgive me, sir. I don't recall that statement.
I think it might have been in a representation rather than a. It didn't provide us with a hearing statement, I don't believe. To find it, but on the basis it had been suggested, I was keen to explore it. And I'm just going to find it. essentially there was a suggestion that some text was to be inserted in the support. It was in supporting text around further development at the airport was only going to be permitted where direct and indirect impacts to Dungeness, Romney, Marsh, and Ryby, Triple SI, SPA, and Ramsar site can be avoided or fully mitigated.
I don't have that text in front of me. I'm sorry, sir, but perhaps if it could just be cross-referenced against the local plan policy, we would just be keen that we're not saying something slightly different than is in the adopted local plan policy biodiversity NE2, really, which sort of sets out the hierarchy of sites and how we would treat planning applications against those sites. Really.
Yes, I just direct you back to your statement. I think it was a suggestion that I think the main concern I had was not only was the matter adequately covered elsewhere in the development plan, but also the specific wording was very much what I shall say policy text, but being sort of included in reason to justification. And I was a little bit concerned that supporting text shouldn't perhaps be saying will only be permitted. So I just wanted to sort of get an understanding of when
we were as I think we said to you in yesterday or the day before, we are also trying to agree a statement to common ground with Natural England on the matters that aren't related to nutrient neutrality, and we had comments back from them recently. So we would hope to get that to you in advance. It mostly related to the New Garden settlement, but I can see if that text was within their draft statement for.
Yes, because I'm not sort of terribly comfortable about sort of just because we also need to consider the principle of whether a main modification is necessary in that regard, and I'm not terribly keen to sort of do too much of that out with hearing sessions. So obviously that was why the discussion on it, and obviously make sure all parties have had the opportunity to see it. But it was in Natural England's statement.
So in the even without the additional wording in relation to that policy for LID, even if that's not seen to be needed to give effectiveness to the policy, the only other issue there is a statement that the council would be proactive in terms of engaging with the applicant in relation to an area action plan. It could be made explicitly clear that proposals would only be permitted if they didn't cause the harms, and so wording to that effect could be included in the policy if you thought it necessary. All I'm saying is we're open to whatever you might decide.
Yes, I just wanted to establish whether it was indeed necessary, because if there is a policy that covers internationally protected sites within the development plan elsewhere, I'm unclear as to why it was also going to be needed specifically on that issue. But
yeah, I'm not sure that it is specifically needed because, as I said, the area action plan will be subject to a habitats regulations assessment. I mean, perhaps that can be made clear there, just so that everyone understands the parameters which are imposed on the local authority in exercising its functions in delivering an action area plan, just to make it clear to everyone.
Because I have some concerns with the wording that Natural England put forward, and unfortunately they're not here to fully articulate their position. No. But obviously the wording that they've promoted doesn't specify in terms of whether development which would be permitted development or otherwise that which requires permission. So so yes, okay.
Yeah. Well, I think for the purposes of the core strategy, bearing in mind we're looking at this at a very high level, that it is not seen as permitting any particular further expansion of the airport, but that it is encouraging dialogue through an action area plan as a means of getting proposals together at policy level to process later into an application. I think all that needs to be done is to acknowledge somewhere, either in the supporting text or in the policy, that the production of the area action plan will be subject to a habitats regulations assessment. I think that's all that needs to be said.
Yes, I think that probably would address the matter. Yeah. Okay. Well, as I say, I'll put that one back to yourselves to.
Okay. Well, that's what I would suggest, unless you think the policy ought to include what was originally suggested and subject of the agreement with LID in relation to small-scale development, etc. That's rather independent of the suggestion I just made in any event.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we've probably done that one as far as we can. Ms. Barton, you have a hand raised.
Yes, I mean, shouldn't it be both? Subject to the additional sentence that's been added to the the common ground statement, and subject to the habitats regulations. I mean, I should imagine Natural England is very worried because they've interpreted the situation as meaning more development, i.e. moving from 500,000 passengers per annum to a higher level of activity. I mean, this is to do with clarity, and it's not clear. I get back to the point that we are talking about redevelopment of the site or partial redevelopment of the site, and that is what should be in the statement. That is a realistic, that is a true desire of the airport, and that should be very, very clear.
Thank you. I think, as we've discussed, I think because of the nature of what policy S1 says and the approach to deal with expansion through an area action plan, should that come forward, by addressing a main modification to ensure that it's clear that where that happens, habitats regulation assessment will obviously be carried out, would address that concern.
Yeah. I agree. I think that's the appropriate approach, irrespective of whether you think the additional wording for smaller scale development should be added.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you? Sorry, Mr. Sherrich, could you make that clear? I mean, are you saying you're going to keep that sentence, which I thought was actually a very good sentence because it put the airport in the box a little bit? But are you saying that you don't need that final sentence?
No, what I'm saying is there is a statement of intent in the policy to proceed with an action area plan should proposals come forward.
Mm-hmm.
But that should include also the caveat that the area action plan would be subject to a habitats regulations assessment.
Okay, and it doesn't.
All right.
Okay.
The second point is if the inspector feels, if the inspectors feel that the additional wording in relation to small scale development should be included, then that would stand, as it were, as a separate issue, which would have its own subject to satisfying the habitats regulations assessment.
Okay, okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments on that.
Thank you, sir.
I had nothing else I wanted to raise, and I've been through all of the points that I had for the council. So if are there any other final points that we haven't covered that participants wanted to make? I saw a brief hand flash up. I neglected. I didn't catch who it was because it disappeared.
I think so. It was me. I think it's dealt with. I think the discussion about the habitats regulation. I'm happy with that. We'd have to go through that if there was an action area plan.
Indeed. Okay. So on that basis, I didn't have any further points, and I'm not seeing any further points being sought to be raised. So thank you very much for your contributions this afternoon. It's been a very helpful discussion to me in forming my thoughts. Obviously, there are some actions that flow out from that, and obviously those will be captured and recorded for you to go away and do. All it was I was intending to say otherwise was that for those who are being seen again at the remaining sessions that we're holding for this year, I look forward to seeing you. And for anyone who I'm not, wish you all a restful Christmas and New Year, and look forward to seeing everyone in future sessions in 2021.
Thank you, sir.